You invited her? To my wedding? Those were the first words whispered by a furious bride moments before she orchestrated the cruelest humiliation imaginable. Monique Ellis-Rhodes walked into the wedding of a former classmate wearing a simple blue linen dress. Graceful, elegant, modest. But to the glittering elite of Los Angeles, that dress became the trigger for an avalanche of cruelty. They laughed at her, mocked her, live-streamed her humiliation. And then, they kicked her out. What they didn't know, Monique wasn't just any guest. She was the co-owner of a global empire. She was the wife of Dominic Rhodes, one of the most powerful billionaires in America. And when he walked into that ballroom, everything changed. What followed was one of the most stunning reversals of public cruelty the world has ever seen. A moment that shattered egos, exposed deep prejudice, and gave rise to a woman whose quiet dignity would ignite a national movement. This is not just a story about revenge, it's a story about restoration. About what happens when the woman you tried to shame becomes the one the world chooses to follow. Now, before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. And now, let's get back to the story. I told you not to invite her. This is mortifying. The words hissed from between perfectly painted lips, sharp as a diamond blade, cut through the soft hum of wedding preparations, and pierced the mood of the room like a sudden crack of thunder. Brielle Kensington, social media's darling and heiress of the Kensington real estate fortune, stood frozen in the center of her glass-walled penthouse. Her arms were folded across her chest, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on a champagne flute. The sunlight streaming in from the panoramic windows framed her in ethereal glow, but her voice was anything but angelic. Across from her, Camille glanced up from the crystal-embellished guest list on Brielle's iPad. It's done. The invitation already went out. Brielle's eyes narrowed. To Monique Ellis? That charity case bookworm from high school? She scoffed, a bitter smile creeping across her lips. That's rich. Sloane, reclining on the ivory couch in her Balenciaga gown in progress, smirked. I mean, if you want your wedding to trend globally, we'll need a moment that blows people's minds. This is genius. They laughed. Three women so steeped in luxury, they'd forgotten what authenticity even smelled like. But across the state, miles from the chatter of champagne glasses and socialite sabotage, Monique Ellis stood in the middle of her living room in Atlanta, Georgia, holding an envelope so thick and shimmering it nearly felt sacred. Her name, Miss Monique Ellis, had been pressed in gold leaf across the front in ornate script. She had turned it over in her hands 3 times before gently peeling it open, a quiet sense of disbelief fluttering inside her. Inside, an invitation to the most extravagant wedding of the season. She read it once, then again. Dearest Monique, it would mean the world to me to have you at my wedding. I've always admired your grace, and I'd be honored to reconnect on this special day. Love always, Brielle. Monique blinked. Brielle? It had been over 15 years since she'd last heard that name. Since their days at Willowbrook High, where the social caste was etched into locker doors and hallway whispers. Back then, Brielle had floated through the world like a gilded swan, while Monique, in her thrift store jeans and third-hand textbooks, had blended into corners with quiet resilience and unshakable focus. They weren't friends, not really. More like distant planets forced into orbit for a few years. Brielle had ignored her in class, mocked her during lunch, and in senior year, humiliated her in front of a packed auditorium with a cruel prank Monique still didn't speak of. So why this now? Why a wedding invitation? And why such flowery language? Still, Monique was not a woman who clung to old wounds. She had outgrown that life, reshaped herself with purpose and clarity. While Brielle had collected followers and red carpet appearances, Monique had built something infinitely rarer. A life rooted in peace, purpose, and authenticity. She'd declined magazine features, donated anonymously, lived humbly, even after marrying one of the most powerful men in the country, though few even knew it. Maybe, she thought, people do change. She looked again at the ivory card in her hand and whispered, half to herself, half to her reflection in the kitchen window, maybe this is her way of making things right. Back in Los Angeles, the trap was already being set. Her RSVP just came in, Ivy said gleefully. twirling a lock of platinum hair as she scrolled through her phone. "She's coming." "Perfect," Brielle replied, her voice dipped in venom. "Let's make sure she gets the full high society welcome." 3 weeks later, as the private jets of the elite began to touch down in LA, Monique stepped off a quiet commercial flight with nothing more than a modest suitcase and a quiet prayer for grace. She wore a sky blue linen dress, tailored with simplicity and elegance, paired with vintage leather flats she'd owned for years. Her thick black curls were pulled back into a low twist. No designer logo screamed from her wrist. No publicist trailed her. She walked with calm dignity, unaware of the storm waiting at her destination. Now, before the story continues, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. And now, let's get back to the story. When Monique's taxi pulled up to the Grand Alabaster, the driver raised his brow and glanced in the rear view. "You sure this is the right place, ma'am?" he asked, eyeing the procession of Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and Bugattis glinting beneath the California sun. Monique smiled softly. "I'm sure." The hotel loomed like a glass cathedral on the edge of a cliff, its cascading terraces bathed in golden light. Private security scanned guests before allowing them inside. Paparazzi waited with camera flashes poised like loaded guns. Crystal sculptures adorned the marble pathway leading up to the grand ballroom. She stepped out. Her flats kissed the marble with soft resolve. Inside, the whispers began before she even crossed the threshold. "Who is that? Did she just walk in off the beach? No stylist, no glam squad? Is she even on the list?" The stares clung to her like burrs. She approached the check-in desk, where a young blonde woman in a sleek suit glanced at her dress, then gave a tight-lipped smile. "I think you might be looking for the service entrance, ma'am. Uniforms are being distributed around the side hall." For a moment, Monique's throat tightened. The old pain of being underestimated, unseen, dismissed, it rose like smoke. But she smiled gently and reached into her purse, pulling out the ivory invitation with her name in gold. "I believe I'm a guest." The woman blinked, took the invitation, then quickly checked the digital list. Her expression shifted. "Oh," she said, stiffening. "Yes, of course. My apologies. Please, go right in." But the damage had been done, and the whispers had spread like wildfire. As she entered the grand ballroom, every chandelier sparkle, every echo of laughter seemed to reflect the wrong kind of attention. People turned. Some smiled, but not with kindness, only with amusement or mockery barely hidden beneath champagne flutes. And at the far end of the ballroom, under an arch of lilies and firefly lights, Brielle stood with Camille and Sloane, sipping rosé, watching it all unfold with delighted malice. "There she is," Brielle whispered. Sloane smirked. "Wearing that?" Camille added. "She really thought she belonged here." Brielle's crimson lips curled. "And now the fun begins." "You sure she's coming?" Camille leaned toward Brielle, her voice laced with impatience, eyes scanning the room like a lioness on the hunt. "She's already here," Brielle murmured, not looking up. Her gaze remained fixed on a figure walking slowly through the grand ballroom, one that glowed with crystal chandeliers and murmurs of perfume and privilege. "Look at her. Same soft walk, same meek little smile. You'd think she was dropping by a Sunday brunch at a country inn." Sloane, seated beside them in an off-the-shoulder red designer gown, lifted her phone with barely restrained glee. "Oh, this is better than I imagined. Look at the way people are already whispering." A few feet away, Monique Ellis was standing alone near the edge of the floral archway, her hands clasped gently in front of her. She smiled politely as two guests passed, though neither returned the gesture. One woman in a sequin-drenched emerald dress glanced over her shoulder and muttered to her date, "I didn't know there was a casual chic dress code. Someone should have told me." Her date chuckled. "Or a costume party." Monique heard both. She stood still, fighting the instinct to leave. Her breath shallow, her heart heavy, but she held her chin up. Years of surviving boardrooms, backhanded praise, and racialized doubt had forged steel beneath her skin. Still, there was something more venomous in the air tonight, a chill she hadn't felt in years. It wrapped around her like invisible chains. Across the ballroom, Brielle finally made her move. She approached with a dancer's grace, arms poised, shoulders back, confidence dripping off her like silk. Her bridesmaids trailed her like handmaidens of cruelty. "Monique?" Brielle cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "You made it. I was beginning to worry you'd gotten lost." Monique turned, offering a warm smile that masked her rising discomfort. "I wouldn't have missed it. Congratulations, Brielle. The place is stunning." Brielle leaned in for an air kiss, then whispered so softly only Monique could hear. "Still wearing Goodwill, I see. How charming." Monique blinked, startled. But before she could respond, Brielle pulled back with a smile so dazzling it nearly blinded the onlookers. "Everyone," she called lightly, turning to her inner circle. "This is Monique. We go way back." Camille and Sloane giggled like schoolgirls. "Oh right, Willowbrook High," Camille said, feigning nostalgia. "You were the valedictorian, weren't you? Always had your nose in a book." Sloane added with mock sincerity. "And that hair, so wild and brave. It's nice to see you still embracing your roots." Monique smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Some things don't need fixing." "Oh," Sloane said, lips curled. "That's one way to see it." Then the flash of a camera lit the air like lightning. Ashley, Brielle's cousin and an influencer notorious for ruthless commentary, had joined the group, already filming. She zoomed in on Monique, her tone laced with faux excitement. "And here we have tonight's unexpected gem. The one who came in with a look straight from Sunday service. Say cheese, sweetheart." Monique turned slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Please don't." Ashley ignored her. "Don't worry, babe. I'm just capturing realness. My followers are gonna love this." The photo was posted before Monique could even step away. Within seconds, the caption read, "When you crash a billionaire's wedding, wearing your grandma's church dress. #fashion fail, guest gone wrong." Laughter trickled across the ballroom like oil spreading through water. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. Monique could feel the spotlight shifting, gazes burning her from every direction. Every polite smile she received now felt performative, every glance tinged with ridicule. She turned, slowly making her way toward the refreshment table, hoping for a moment's reprieve. But Brielle wasn't finished. "Did you bring a gift?" she asked, trailing behind with Ashley and Sloane. Monique nodded, lifting a small wrapped box tied with hand-twisted gold ribbon. "I did. Something personal, I thought." "How precious," Brielle interrupted, her smile now openly condescending. "You didn't have to go through all that trouble. After all, you've always been better with handcrafted things." Ashley smirked. "We love a handmade moment." Brielle's voice cut in louder, clearly for the benefit of onlookers. "I bet it's something one of a kind. You know, something you can't buy." More chuckles. Eyes watched. Phones hovered. Monique placed the gift gently onto the collection table near the gold-trimmed welcome board, her fingers lingering on it for a moment, as if saying goodbye to her own dignity. "Excuse me," she said quietly, stepping away. But there was nowhere to hide. A few feet away, Camille was now in full performance mode, narrating a fashion analysis into her phone, casting a lingering zoom toward Monique's shoes. "And for footwear tonight, our mystery guest chose a quaint, no-label flat, truly bold." The laughter no longer even tried to be subtle. It rolled across the ballroom like thunder. Monique's hands began to tremble. She took a deep breath, then another. But before she could retreat to the restroom or find a quiet corner to regroup, Brielle returned, this time holding a glass of blood-red wine. "I figured you might need this," she said sweetly, holding the glass toward Monique. Monique accepted it reluctantly. "Thank you." "Careful," Sloane whispered behind her. "She might spill that and really complete the look." Ashley laughed loud enough for heads to turn. Now that would go viral. Suddenly, Brielle's hand twitched. The wine glass jerked forward, and with a theatrical gasp it tilted, splashing red across Monique's pale blue dress like a slash of war paint. Gasps erupted. "Oh no," Brielle cried, placing a hand over her mouth. "I'm so clumsy." Monique stood frozen, the sting of cold wine running down her dress, her face burning hotter than she could ever remember. Someone snickered, then another. Then came the flood. Laughter exploded. Phones went up, flashes flared. One voice near the fountain said, "Well, now she really looks out of place." Monique's hands clutched her soaked skirt, her body stiff as stone. She was drowning in a sea of cameras, cruelty, and gleeful malice. No one offered a napkin, no one came to her defense. No one except the hotel's security detail, two men in sleek black suits, who appeared at Brielle's subtle nod. "Ma'am," one said carefully, eyes darting around the scene. "We've been asked to escort you to the side hall." "Escort?" Monique echoed. "For your comfort," the guard added, eyes flickering to Brielle, then back to Monique. "And the comfort of the guests." It was only then that Monique understood. This hadn't been awkward. It had been arranged. A chill poured down her spine, colder than the wine soaking her dress. But she stood tall. "I'll leave on my own," she said softly, eyes locked on Brielle. "I don't need an escort to walk away from people who lost their decency." Brielle blinked, just briefly, then gave a practiced smile. "Of course, darling, I understand." Monique turned, her soaked dress trailing behind her like a battle flag, her face a mask of control. But deep inside, something was shifting. The pain, the embarrassment, the betrayal, it was igniting something far more powerful. Something no one in that glittering room was prepared for. And the night was far from over. The ballroom doors yawned open. Monique stepped into the night air, the world inside collapsing behind her like a cruel stage curtain. Laughter and murmurs still echoed faintly from the grand hall, each word, each chuckle, embedding itself into her spine like thorns. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, blue linen stained a deep burgundy from the wine. The once soft fabric now felt stiff, cold, like the world she'd just walked out of. Marcus, one of the security guards, trailed quietly behind her, his steps hesitant. The other, a younger man named Ryan, remained closer to the doorway, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said gently, breaking the silence. His voice was low, warm, almost ashamed. "They told us to escort you, but I didn't know it would be like that." Monique turned to him slowly. Her eyes glistened, but the tears hadn't fallen yet. Not yet. "I know," she whispered. "You're just doing your job." But her voice cracked on the last word. For a moment, Marcus looked like he might cry too. "If I had known, I would have." She raised a hand and stopped him. "It's not on you, it's on them." Just then, a door on the far end of the marble terrace swung open, and another wave of laughter tumbled out. Inside, someone shouted, "Now that's how you remind the help where they stand." The words sliced through her. Monique closed her eyes. She hadn't cried yet. She had told herself she wouldn't give them that. Not the satisfaction, not the weakness, not the final wound. But alone now, her hands trembling and the fabric of her dignity hanging in tatters, the tears came. Silently. One by one. Until a low thunder rolled in the distance. Not from the sky, from the road. It started as a hum, barely audible beneath the ocean breeze. Then it swelled into a deep growl, mechanical, rhythmic, relentless. Engines. Big ones. 3 matte black Rolls-Royces curved into the entrance loop of the Grand Alabaster like panthers emerging from fog. The valets stood frozen. Guests inside began to fall quiet, sensing something strange. Something out of sync with the elegant cruelty of the evening. The doors of the first car opened with a soft click. A tall man in a black suit stepped out. Every inch of him spoke authority. Tailored precision, gloved hands, a quiet storm behind the eyes. He adjusted his cufflinks, then looked up at the glowing hotel with steely calm. Marcus blinked. Ryan stepped closer. Monique didn't move. She didn't have to, because the man in the suit was already walking toward her. When he reached her, his entire face changed. The hard edge softened. The furrowed brow lifted. The storm became light. "Monique," he said, and suddenly, the entire world stood still. She looked up, eyes full of stunned recognition, disbelief, and emotion crashing into each other like waves. "Dominic," she whispered. "Dominic Rhodes, tech magnate, billionaire, architect of Rhodes Global. The man whose name could shift the stock market. The man who had once turned down a Forbes cover because he hated shallow praise. The man she had quietly married 8 years ago, and whose identity she had fiercely protected to shield their private, genuine life from the circus of fame. And now, here he was, walking directly into the fire. Dominic stepped forward, gently taking her hand. He looked down at the crimson stain across her dress. Then he looked up, toward the ballroom. His jaw tensed. Without a word, he turned, still holding Monique's hand, and strode past Marcus and Ryan. Through the double doors, and into the glowing epicenter of luxury, cruelty, and spectacle. The ballroom fell silent, like a spell had been shattered. People turned. Phones dropped. It took no more than 3 seconds for the whispers to begin. "Wait, is that? Oh my God, it's him. Dominic Rhodes? What is he doing here? Wasn't he in Geneva yesterday? As he walked toward the center of the room, still holding Monique's hand, every guest instinctively stepped back, clearing a path not out of respect, but fear. Monique followed closely behind, her heart thundering in her chest. And at the far end of the ballroom, near the grand archway where all the laughter had begun, Brielle Kensington turned slowly. Her face drained of color. She recognized him. The man whose empire had built cities, whose innovations had powered half of Silicon Valley, whose silence was worth more than most people's fortunes. She looked from Dominic to Monique, and her world began to tilt. Dominic stopped in the very center of the ballroom. Then, slowly, he raised their clasped hands and spoke. His voice was velvet wrapped around steel, calm, commanding, and unshakably clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "my deepest apologies for interrupting this event." Silence. No one breathed. Dominic looked around the room, eyes scanning each face like a ledger. "But there is something you all need to know." He turned to Monique and gave her hand a gentle squeeze, the kind that said, "You're not alone anymore. This woman," he said, "whom so many of you just mocked, insulted, and humiliated in front of a crowd, is my wife." Gasps broke through the silence like lightning striking still water. Brielle took a step backward, her hands trembling. Dominic continued. "Monique Ellis-Rhodes, co-owner of Rhodes Global, director of the philanthropic Rhodes Initiative, advisor to 6 Fortune 100 companies, and the woman who, without ever needing to boast, has done more for this country's communities than anyone in this room." His words struck the room like thunder. People began to lower their eyes, phones were pocketed, influencers shrank behind their glam squads, and somewhere near the cake display, Ashley's live stream shut off with a silent tap. Dominic turned slowly, now facing the stage, his voice rising just slightly, not in volume but weight. "And tonight, you tried to reduce her to a spectacle. You ridiculed her clothing. You humiliated her for being different. You laughed when you thought she had no power. But I see now that it wasn't her dress you couldn't tolerate, it was her dignity." His eyes landed on Brielle. "And as for you?" She froze. Dominic took a step toward her. "You invited her here to disgrace her. You targeted her. You orchestrated a public lynching of her spirit for entertainment. And in doing so, you've exposed not her worth, but your own." Brielle opened her mouth, but no sound came. Dominic didn't need more words. The truth had already raised her to ash. Monique, standing beside him, felt her shame unraveling, like knots dissolving in sunlight. She was no longer the woman who had arrived alone. She was no longer the woman who was escorted out in humiliation. Now she stood with the man who had built empires, but bowed only to truth. And the room, once filled with mockery, now could only bow to her. A hush lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Dominic's words still echoed across the crystal chandeliers and velvet-lined walls, bouncing off the marble floors and into the tightly clenched hearts of every guest who had laughed just moments ago. Brielle Kensington, once the star of the evening, the diamond-tipped darling of West Coast society, stood motionless. Her designer gown, custom-stitched in Italy, suddenly felt like a shroud. Her perfectly styled curls clung to her cheeks like a mask melting under scrutiny. Dominic's gaze was unwavering, like he was looking not just at her, but through her. And then, a chair scraped. All eyes turned. From the corner of the ballroom, the groom, Ryan Lancaster, stood slowly. His tuxedo was flawless, but his expression was anything but calm. The young tech entrepreneur, known for launching Lancaster Ventures before his 30th birthday, whose name was whispered with reverence in venture capital circles, walked forward like a man waking from a long, deceitful dream. "Dominic," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence like glass. "Before you go, I need to say something." Brielle spun toward him, her voice suddenly trembling with panic. "Ryan, wait." But he held up his hand. "Don't." He stepped past her, then turned to the crowd. His face was pale, but his voice grew stronger with every word. "I know many of you came here tonight expecting the wedding of the decade. Lavish. Picture perfect, like a fantasy you could post about for the next month." He paused, eyes sweeping across a room of frozen influencers and hollow smiles. "But you didn't come to witness love. You came to witness performance. Cruelty." A ripple of discomfort spread through the audience. He turned to Monique and Dominic, his tone shifting to one of regret and sincerity. "I never told anyone this," Ryan said, "but years ago when I had nothing, no reputation, no capital, no investors. I had 2 people who believed in me. Not because I was a name. Not because I had connections, but because I had heart. He looked directly at Monique. You sat with me at that coffee shop in Atlanta for hours. You helped me build a business plan on a napkin. You called me when I couldn't afford rent and wired me enough to survive. You never asked for anything in return. You said, just do right by people when it's your turn. A low gasp swept across the room. Monique's lips parted, tears springing to her eyes. But she didn't speak. Ryan turned to the crowd once more, voice steady now. And I failed you. He turned to Brielle. I thought I was building a life with a woman who had vision, class, strength. But what I witnessed tonight, what you orchestrated, was the most calculated, heartless display of cruelty I've ever seen. Brielle's lips quivered. Ryan, they're exaggerating. I didn't know it would go this far. Ryan shook his head. Don't lie. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen, and within seconds, his voice rose to carry across the room. I think everyone here deserves to know the truth behind tonight. On the screen, he displayed a group chat, one between Brielle, Camille, Sloane, and Ashley. Messages flickered in real time on the massive digital projection behind the stage. Several guests audibly gasped. Brielle, let's invite Monique and then make her the punchline of the night. She'll show up in some basic mall outfit. It'll be hilarious. If she brings a gift, let's get security to inspect it. Add some drama. A pregnant pause choked the air, but Ryan wasn't done. He scrolled again and tapped on another message, this one sent just 2 days ago. Sloane, she's the only black guest here. We can play that up, make it obvious she doesn't belong. Gasps turned to horror. Camille shrank in her seat. Ashley's jaw dropped as her own words flashed across the wall behind her. Ashley, we should stream her getting kicked out. That would break the algorithm. Bonus points if she cries. No one laughed now. No one dared move. Brielle took a desperate step forward. Ryan, stop, please. We can fix this. Just come with me. We'll explain everything. But Ryan didn't flinch. His voice cut through the hush like a gavel. No, we can't fix this, because this isn't a misunderstanding. This is you. And I refuse to marry a woman who finds entertainment in tearing another person down. Brielle collapsed into a chair, face pale as porcelain, fingers shaking. And then Ryan turned to the audience. I'm calling off this wedding. A sharp breath of air sucked through the crowd. Murmurs erupted. Camera flashes blinked like lightning. One influencer fainted. The pianist who'd been scheduled to play during the reception slowly closed the lid over the keys. Brielle's mother buried her face in her hands. Dominic watched quietly. Monique stood, stunned. Her eyes wide not with vengeance but disbelief. And Ryan continued, turning back to her once more. I don't know if I can ever undo what you went through tonight. But I want the world to know that you, Monique Ellis, are the only reason I ever had a chance at building something real. And I'm so sorry I let someone like Brielle use my name to hurt you. Monique was silent for a moment, tears now streaking freely down her cheeks, not from shame, but from the overwhelming flood of vindication and release. She walked forward and gently placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. I forgive you, she said quietly, because you stood up when it mattered most. Ryan's face crumpled with gratitude. Behind them, Brielle could only watch, alone now in a room that once worshipped her, her crown crumbling silently. No one applauded, no one comforted her, not even her closest friends. Because they knew, as did every person present, that a cruel game had reached its end, and the woman they tried to destroy now stood taller than them all. The ballroom was a cathedral of silence now. Gone was the smug buzz of influencers posturing for attention. Gone was the rhythm of clinking glasses and curated laughter. All that remained was tension, thick and electric, spanning every corner of the grand alabaster. Brielle still sat slumped in her ivory chair, the bride who never made it to the altar. Her hands trembled in her lap, her once blazing confidence now drowned beneath the tidal wave of shame. Across the room, Monique stood tall. Her dress still bore the blood-red stain of spilled wine, but her posture was unbreakable. Her eyes, though tear-stained, shimmered not with defeat, but quiet power. And beside her, Dominic Rhodes took a breath. Then, in a voice both calm and commanding, he turned toward his assistant, who had just slipped into the ballroom from a discreet side door. She was tall, composed, and carried a tablet in her hand. "Emily," he said without raising his voice. "Let's begin the cleanup." She nodded once, already in motion. The words were quiet, but the reaction was immediate. From both sides of the ballroom, 3 additional security officers emerged. Dressed in sleek black suits, earpieces glowing faintly, they looked like they'd been pulled from a high-level intelligence detail. The guests stiffened. Then Emily stepped forward. Her voice was crisp, professional, almost too polite. "Rhodes has requested a review of all media activity from this evening. Our team has already collected footage from the hotel's surveillance, along with every live stream and tagged photo posted by attendees in the last 90 minutes. Her fingers danced across the tablet as she spoke. "We've identified at least 47 instances of targeted verbal harassment, 11 posts designed to publicly ridicule a private guest, and 6 direct violations of Grand Alabaster's anti-discrimination event policy." A few guests gasped. Someone near the bar dropped their phone. Emily looked up with a faint, unreadable smile. "We're beginning with the most egregious offenders. As of now, they are being asked to vacate the premises." Sloane, who had spent the earlier part of the evening live-streaming Monique's discomfort with glee, let out a tiny, disbelieving laugh. "Wait, are you serious?" 2 security officers appeared at her side. "Yes," one replied, his tone respectful, but unmoved. "We are." No, this is ridiculous," Sloane blurted, rising from her chair. "I was just joking. That video only got like 1,000 views. It's not that serious." But her protests were ignored. As she was gently escorted toward the side exit, she turned to the crowd in desperation. "Seriously? You're going to punish me for a joke?" No one answered, because no one dared defend her now. As the doors closed behind her, a hush of justice settled into the walls. Next, the officers moved to Camille, who had gleefully called Monique's dress a family heirloom from her grandma. Her carefully composed face crumpled the moment her name was called. She rose shakily, clutching her designer clutch like it might shield her from consequence. "Look, I didn't even post anything. I laughed because everyone else was." Dominic's voice sliced clean through the excuse. "Then let this moment remind you. Complicity is a choice." Camille didn't speak again. She simply lowered her head and followed the security detail out. Then came Ashley. Her expression was less panicked than the others, more defiant. She stood and crossed her arms, facing Dominic squarely. "I didn't know she was your wife," she said sharply, as if that justified anything. "If I had known, I would have." "You would have pretended to be kind," Dominic interrupted. "But kindness doesn't count when it's only offered to power." Ashley faltered, and then Emily raised the tablet again and read aloud. Ashley's caption: "Live from the wedding at special guest in her best clearance rack couture, budget ballroom." Ashley's face turned white. "Escort her," Emily said calmly. As the officers approached, Ashley tried one final time. "Wait, I'll delete the post. I'll apologize, please." But Dominic's tone was resolute. "No, you had your moment, now she gets hers." The crowd watched as Ashley was led out. Every step she took felt like the slow unraveling of an empire built on cruelty and borrowed clout. Only Brielle remained, still seated, still silent, her eyes no longer defiant, just empty. Dominic turned, finally facing her. "Brielle Kensington," he said. Her name landed like a hammer. "You orchestrated all of this," he continued. "You sent the invitation under false pretenses. You encouraged humiliation. You exploited your own event to publicly shame a woman who once offered you nothing but decency." He paused, letting every word settle like judgment in the air. "Tonight, you showed the world exactly who you are. So let me be just as clear. You are no longer welcome in any sphere that honors dignity, character, or humanity." Brielle didn't move. She couldn't. Because it wasn't just her wedding that had collapsed, it was everything. The deals she'd secured through charm, the sponsorships she'd curated with smiling photo ops, the network that propped her up because she played the part of elegance, all gone. Dominic turned slightly toward the guests. "My legal team will be in touch with every publication and platform that broadcasted Monique's humiliation tonight. Those of you who contributed to it directly, through word, photo, or silence, should expect consequences. Not out of vengeance, but justice." And then his voice softened. "But this moment isn't just about punishment." He looked to Monique, and the air shifted again. "This moment is about lifting the woman who never stopped standing, even when the entire room tried to knock her down. Monique's eyes brimmed again, but this time, the tears weren't from pain, they were from recognition. Dominic turned to Emily once more. "Let's give her what she deserves." Emily nodded and spoke into her headset. "Send in the suite team, we're ready." Guests turned toward the grand entrance again, confused, until the ballroom doors opened once more. 2 staff members, dressed in sleek uniforms, emerged carrying a wardrobe bag and a velvet box. They crossed the ballroom to Monique and bowed gently. "Mrs. Rhodes," one of them said, "your room is ready." The crowd parted instinctively as Monique, still in her wine-stained linen dress, still glowing with the poise of a queen, walked toward the private corridor. The air around her shimmered with reverence. Not one person jeered. Not one voice rose to stop her. Only eyes followed, some in awe, some in guilt. And when she disappeared through the doorway, Dominic faced the crowd once more. "She'll be back in 10 minutes, he said. "And this time, you'll stand when she enters." 10 minutes had never passed so slowly. The grand alabaster ballroom, once pulsing with vanity and performance, now held its breath. Chandeliers twinkled overhead, casting light that suddenly felt cleansing. The laughter had stopped. The cameras, for once, were lowered. And the guests, those who had whispered cruel things, those who had silently watched the spectacle unfold, now stood uneasy, unsure of where to look, unsure how to feel. The great marble doors at the far end of the hall remained closed. Dominic stood near the center, straight-backed, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped loosely behind him. His presence was not just commanding, it was protective, like a citadel standing guard. And then, the soft click of heels on marble. The doors opened, and the room fell still. Monique Ellis-Rhodes stepped into the light. Gone was the wine-stained linen. Now she wore a flowing white silk gown that glimmered with the subtlest shimmer of moonlight. The fabric hugged her figure like it had been woven by grace itself. Simple, timeless, utterly regal. Her glossy black hair, now unbound, cascaded over her shoulders in elegant waves, and her eyes, no longer heavy with sorrow, shone with quiet power. Every step she took was silent thunder, and one by one the entire room rose to its feet, not from obligation, but reverence. They had tried to cast her out. Now they couldn't look away. Dominic extended his hand to her, his gaze filled with awe. She took it without hesitation, and together they walked toward the center of the ballroom, where just minutes ago she had been shamed. Now she reigned. As they approached the heart of the hall, a hush swept across the crowd like a tide. And then, from near the back of the room, Ryan Lancaster, the man who had just called off his wedding to the woman who orchestrated Monique's humiliation, stepped forward. His eyes were glassy with emotion. He bowed low. "Monique," he said softly, "I offer you my deepest apology. Not just for being silent, but for being blind. I let myself be used to hurt the one person who believed in me when no one else did." Monique looked at him, her voice calm but unwavering. "I forgave you the moment you stood up for the truth." Ryan swallowed hard. "Your forgiveness humbles me, and I promise, I'll spend the rest of my life living up to it." She nodded once, and then Ryan turned to Dominic and bowed as well. "Thank you for defending her when it mattered most." Dominic placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for finally seeing her." Ryan stepped back into the crowd, and for the first time all evening the room felt awake, changed, moved, and then Dominic turned to the guests. He raised his voice, not in anger, but clarity. "This is not just about Monique," he began. "It's about every person who has ever been judged by their clothes, their skin, their income, their past. It's about how quickly we forget that dignity doesn't require a designer label." Eyes dropped. A few sniffled. He continued, his voice resonating like a final verdict. "We measured the wrong things tonight. We honored status over substance, appearances over character. But this woman," he gestured to Monique, "stood in your scorn and never once lowered her gaze. That is power." Silence. And then applause. It began softly. One person, then two, and then the ballroom erupted, not in forced clapping, but in genuine, rising, thunderous applause. People who had judged her now clapped with heads bowed, others with tear-streaked cheeks, some even whispered apologies through the roar. And Monique, she stood still for a long moment, taking it all in. Not out of pride, but presence. She turned slightly, taking the microphone Dominic handed her. The applause quieted instantly. I came here tonight with nothing but kindness in my heart, she said softly. I thought I was attending a celebration of love, but instead I became a target for being different, for being me. She paused, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening in her throat. But I've learned that sometimes the greatest storms show us exactly who we are. And tonight, I remembered who I am. She took a deep breath. I am Monique Ellis-Rhodes, daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs, valedictorian of a high school no one remembered until today, a woman who built something from nothing, a leader, a wife, a fighter, and yes, a woman who still believes in love. Tears welled in more than a few eyes. She smiled gently. And now I ask something of all of you, not for me, but for yourselves. The next time you see someone you think doesn't belong, ask yourself why. And if you find the answer is rooted in judgment, ego, or fear, change it. Choose better. The ballroom was quiet. Even the air listened. Then she handed the microphone back to Dominic, who stepped up once more. My friends, he said, the night is still young. But if we're to move forward from this moment, it can't be with champagne and music. It must begin with humility, with reflection, and with a collective decision to never allow a moment like this to happen again. Then he turned to Monique, took her hand and whispered just for her, "You're everything they tried to erase, and more." And the crowd applauded once again. Only this time, they weren't just clapping for what Monique had survived. They were clapping for who she had always been. The applause finally began to settle. But the energy in the grand alabaster ballroom lingered like aftershocks from an earthquake. Guests now stood not with arrogance, but with awareness. The atmosphere was no longer dripping with pretense. It pulsed with something real. Redemption, reverence, and a growing hunger to do better. Monique stood beside Dominic, hands clasped gently in front of her, her silk gown gliding like moonlight as she moved toward the center platform where a floral arch once stood waiting for a different bride. She wasn't here to take someone else's place. She was here to reclaim her own. Just then, a familiar voice rose softly from near the back of the ballroom. "Excuse me, could I say something?" Heads turned. It was Tyra Nguyen, a Vietnamese-American philanthropist and CEO of a global education fund, one of the most respected women in the room. She stepped forward slowly, hands trembling just slightly, and faced Monique with a look of solemn grace. "I've sat through many galas," Tyra began, "many ceremonies, many fundraisers, but I have never been so moved by someone's strength as I have been tonight by yours." Monique's breath caught, but she said nothing. "You didn't just endure," Tyra continued. "You transformed this space. You reminded every person in this room that true worth is measured in character, not couture." She turned toward Dominic. "Mr. Rhodes, if I may, your wife's quiet impact has not gone unnoticed over the years. In fact, many of us here have benefited from her work, though we never knew her name. Tonight, I believe it's time to change that." Tyra lifted a small velvet box and opened it with quiet ceremony. Inside was a medal, delicate but dazzling, engraved with a single phrase, "In light, we rise." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This is the inaugural honor of illumination," Tyra said. "And it was created to recognize those who lift others without seeking the spotlight. We were going to announce it next month, but after tonight..." She stepped forward and gently pinned it to Monique's dress. "You don't just deserve this, you define it." The room, again, rose to its feet, this time not just in applause but in tears. Even those who had whispered behind Monique's back now clapped with trembling hands, their hearts pried open by the raw grace of what they'd witnessed. Dominic took Monique's hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. And then, a shrill voice cut across the stillness. "What about me?" The crowd turned. Brielle Kensington was standing now. Shaky. Her veil had long since been discarded, her makeup smeared beneath desperate hands. Her eyes were bloodshot, her expression unhinged. "You've said your piece," she spat. "Everyone said theirs. What else do you want? You've taken everything." Dominic didn't flinch. Monique didn't blink. And yet the crowd drew back. Brielle staggered forward, her voice cracking as it climbed in pitch. "I built this night. I built this guest list. These decorations, this venue, this," she gestured wildly toward the arch, "this fantasy. And now you're all applauding her? The woman who came in here like a ghost?" "Brielle," came a voice from behind the crowd. It was Ryan Lancaster. She turned sharply. "Don't start with me again." But Ryan didn't shout. He simply walked forward and held out his phone again. The same device he had used earlier to expose the group chat. Only now, the screen showed something different. A live news feed. Every major outlet, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, even local LA stations, was covering the story. Headline: Bride humiliates black woman in viral wedding scandal. Turns out she's married to billionaire tech mogul. Brielle's lips parted in disbelief. No, she whispered. That's not possible. Ryan slowly scrolled down. Sponsorships were dropping her name. Beauty brands she had once endorsed had already posted statements of condemnation. Her speaking tour for next quarter? Cancelled. Her upcoming memoir? Pulled from shelves. Even her own family foundation, created years ago as a tax shelter, was now under audit. You didn't just humiliate Monique, Ryan said. You humiliated yourself, and the difference is, she'll rise. You may not. Brielle shook her head, stumbling backward. Wait, I can fix this. I can apologize. I'll make a video. I'll explain everything. You already did, Dominic replied, his voice as cold as stone. You explained who you are, over and over, and now, the world believes you. Brielle stood there for a moment, drowning in the truth. Not a single person moved to comfort her. Not one guest offered her a glance of pity. Even Camille, Ashley, and Sloane, now long gone, wouldn't answer her calls. And then, hotel security stepped forward one final time. Dominic nodded, and the lead officer approached her with quiet firmness. Miss Kensington, we've been asked to escort you off the premises. The property is no longer available for your use. Brielle laughed, a hollow, broken sound. You're joking. I paid for this entire event. Emily stepped forward beside the officer. Calm, efficient, unshakable. The final invoice has been absorbed by Rhodes Global. Your reservation has been canceled as of 15 minutes ago. Your guests will be relocated, your vendors informed, and your balance forgiven. Brielle looked at her, stunned. Forgiven? She echoed, confused. Emily offered a slight smile. Because we don't want anything with your name on it attached to this place ever again. Brielle staggered backward, and then, two guards gently took her by the arms. No, she whispered. No, this was supposed to be my day. But her screams were muffled by the slow shutting of the ballroom doors behind her. And then she was gone, erased by her own hand. Monique stood quietly at the center of it all. She didn't speak. She didn't gloat. Because she didn't need to. Justice had spoken for her, and her crown, once invisible, now shone so brightly that it silenced the last echo of cruelty in the room. The ballroom doors sealed shut behind Brielle Kensington with a final, echoing click. The kind of silence that followed wasn't empty, it was holy. It rang louder than music, louder than applause, louder than judgment. It was the sound of a room seen clearly for the first time. The shimmer of chandeliers above now felt like a baptism of light, cleansing, humbling, honest. Monique Ellis-Rhodes stood beneath the floral archway, now redefined by her presence. A place once meant to honor superficial love had become a stage for transformation. And she, grace draped in white silk, strength in her spine, a metal gleaming against her heart, turned to face the crowd. Her voice, when it came, didn't rise in anger. It came like morning sunlight, gentle, radiant, warm enough to burn away the fog. I've had people ask me, she began softly, why I choose to live simply. Why someone like me, someone married to a man like Dominic, doesn't wear more labels, show up on magazine covers, or broadcast my success. She paused, letting the truth settle before it bloomed. And the truth is, I never needed any of that to feel valuable. I never needed the world's approval to know who I am. The guests stood motionless. But tonight I was reminded how easy it is to forget that. When every glance becomes a dagger, when laughter cuts deeper than silence, when kindness is mistaken for weakness. Her voice tightened, but she kept going. I was invited here not to celebrate love, but to be made a lesson. And now I choose to make this night a different kind of lesson, for all of us. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A man near the fountain clasped his hands, head bowed. We live in a world obsessed with image, Monique continued. But what does that image cost us? How many people have we dismissed because their shoes didn't shine? How many have we ignored because their names weren't followed by titles or trending hashtags? She stepped closer to the edge of the stage, her tone intimate now. You don't know someone's worth by the cut of their dress or the car they drove up in. You know it by the way they walk through fire and still hold their head high. And then she smiled, softly, genuinely. Tonight I held my head high not because I wasn't hurting, but because the people who tried to tear me down reminded me exactly how strong I am. A ripple of agreement moved through the guests, not applause, not yet. Just something deeper, understanding, reflection. Monique glanced at Dominic, who stood quietly behind her like a lighthouse, present, steady, safe. And I didn't do it alone, she said, because real love, quiet, loyal, unwavering love, doesn't let you fall. It stands beside you when you're most afraid, and reminds you that your light still shines, even in the shadows. Now she addressed the entire room. If you leave here with anything tonight, let it be this. Be the person who lifts someone, who sees their value before the world does, who refuses to stay silent when the mob begins to gather. She gestured toward the floor, where Brielle's train once dragged like a symbol of pageantry. Because when you defend dignity, that's when you rise. The room was still. Then, softly, someone clapped. Then another, and another. Until once again, the ballroom filled with rising, thundering applause. But this time, it wasn't performative. It was pure, earned, deserved. Monique nodded her thanks, then stepped back into Dominic's waiting arms. He kissed her forehead gently, whispering something only she could hear. You've changed the world tonight. She smiled against his chest. I didn't mean to, she whispered back. He chuckled softly. Exactly why you did. And then something unexpected happened. The ballroom staff, waiters, florists, musicians, even the hotel's cleaning crew began to step out from the shadows. One by one, they removed their hats, their gloves, their name tags, and they clapped. Longer than anyone else, because they had seen the worst of what happened tonight from behind the curtains. And now they stood, not as servants, but witnesses. Carriers of the story that would be told again and again. As Monique and Dominic turned to leave the stage, Tara Nguyen reappeared, holding a candle. We were going to light this during the wedding ceremony, she said quietly. But I think it belongs to someone else now. She handed the single white candle to Monique. What for? Monique asked gently. Tyra smiled. To carry the light, because you've given us back ours. And then, for the first time all night, the ballroom lights dimmed. Only the candle remained, and from its flame, each guest was given one of their own. A quiet procession began. No music, just the soft glow of hundreds of flickering candles passed hand to hand, illuminating faces now stripped of ego. One guest whispered to another, "This is no longer a wedding." The other replied, "It's something better." As Monique stood at the center of the glowing room, her candle lighting the faces around her, she realized something profound. This night, born in cruelty, had become a cathedral of truth, a memorial to what was broken, a resurrection of what still could be healed. And as the flames flickered gently across the faces of those once blind to her worth, Monique knew one thing for sure. This was no longer her lowest moment. This was her crowning one. By the time the last candle was extinguished and the final guest stepped into the velvet black Los Angeles night, the story had already taken flight. It began with a whisper, then a headline, then a storm. Woman humiliated at luxury wedding turns out to be billionaire's wife and co-owner of global empire. Bride orchestrates public shaming of black guest, but she picked the wrong woman. Grace in the face of cruelty. Who is Monique Ellis-Rhodes? By dawn, Monique's name had surged across every major platform in the country. Her photo, captured in that stunning silk gown, candlelight casting a halo around her, became a symbol. Not of wealth, but of resilience, of truth. News anchors delivered their stories with tones more reverent than sensational. She didn't speak to destroy, said a CBS anchor. She spoke to remind us who we've become. She could have crushed them, a political commentator said on MSNBC. Instead, she chose to elevate the conversation. Social media, once complicit in the cruelty, now turned itself inside out in a race to apologize. People who had once reposted clips mocking Monique's entrance now flooded the internet with pleas for forgiveness, praise, and accountability. Hashtag "We Stand with Monique" trended globally within 3 hours. Simple dress, strong heart followed behind it. And in a stunning turn, even former critics, celebrities, influencers, and high-profile wedding guests publicly posted heartfelt apologies. Some even recorded videos, standing in their kitchens or offices, voices cracking. "I judged a woman because she didn't fit the image," one tearfully admitted. "I forgot that dignity has nothing to do with diamonds. Schools began inviting Monique to speak. Churches lit candles in her name. University professors assigned analysis essays on her speech as part of coursework on ethics, leadership, and social justice. And then came the real shockwave. The Carter Presidential Library in Atlanta formally extended an invitation for Monique Ellis-Rhodes to speak at its Civil Leadership Forum. In their statement, they wrote, "In an era starved for moral clarity, Mrs. Ellis-Rhodes demonstrated it in its purest form, without anger, without spectacle, without a need to retaliate. She has reminded us that quiet dignity can change the temperature of an entire nation." Back at home in Atlanta, Monique awoke the next morning, not to shame, but to letters. Hundreds of them. From janitors, from senators, from single mothers and high school valedictorians and retired bus drivers who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. Each one handwritten, each one beginning the same way. "I saw myself in you." Dominic, who had stood at the doorway with coffee in hand, simply watched her read them in silence. No words needed. He knew what it meant. Because this had never just been about a dress, or a wedding, or even a billionaire's wife. This was about the cost of judgment, the poison of elitism, the quiet strength of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to teach. And what of Brielle Kensington? The woman who had built her empire on curated elegance, exclusive partnerships, and aspirational aesthetics? Her fall was swift, faster than any influencer backlash the internet had ever witnessed. By Monday morning, her sponsors had pulled out. By Tuesday, her accounts had gone dark. By Wednesday, her entire brand, The Kensington Way, was removed from major retailers and stripped from YouTube monetization. Her public apology, delivered tearfully in a hastily recorded video, was met with cold silence. Because while remorse may be accepted, performative regret rarely is. Most damning of all, a popular Black-led podcast issued a statement that went viral. Brielle didn't fall because she slipped. She fell because she danced on top of another woman's dignity, and the world finally saw the choreography. Brielle vanished from the public eye after that, and Monique, she didn't gloat. She didn't post. She didn't speak of Brielle at all. Because her story was never about revenge. It was about restoration. A week later, Monique was walking through a park in Atlanta when a young woman approached her. No cameras, no phones, just wide, nervous eyes. "Mrs. Ellis-Rhodes," she said shyly, I wanted you to know I wore my natural hair to my job interview today. Because of you." Monique smiled, her heart swelling. "Did you get the job?" she asked. The woman nodded. "They said I lit up the room." "You always did," Monique replied and gently squeezed her hand. Later that night, Dominic found her sitting on their back porch, the evening breeze curling through her curls. He sat beside her. "You know," he said, "we still haven't gone on a honeymoon." Monique chuckled. "That's because we've been building too much." "Maybe it's time we let the world carry the message for a while," he said. "Maybe it's time we rest." She leaned her head on his shoulder. Maybe. But deep inside, she knew her voice had just begun. Because the world hadn't just witnessed her story, it had been changed by it. And when light enters a room that dark, it doesn't just fade, it leaves something behind. The sun poured gold across the Atlanta skyline, stretching its rays over the quiet rooftops and church spires, spilling into the garden of a modest brownstone, where Monique Ellis-Rhodes sat with a cup of tea, her eyes tracing the blossoms swaying gently in the morning light. It had been 2 weeks since the night that changed everything. 2 weeks since the world learned her name, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied something it had nearly forgotten: quiet power. The letters still came. Thousands of them now. Some typed, some handwritten, some folded into trembling envelopes from strangers who wrote things like, "I didn't think people like me belonged anywhere, until I saw you. You made me want to walk into the room I've been avoiding for years. Thank you for reminding us that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy." And still, Monique had not sought the spotlight. She had declined every major talk show, turned down every cover offer, and asked politely to be removed from trending lists. Instead, she chose to listen, to children in underfunded schools, to women re-entering the workforce after years of silence, to people of color who had been told their skin, their tone, their presence was too loud or not loud enough. She didn't speak from a podium. She sat on library floors and held hands in community centers. Because Monique never needed to shout. She only ever needed to mean it. One morning, a handwritten letter arrived from a 12-year-old girl in Detroit. She had seen the viral clips of Monique's humiliation, then the video of her walking back into the ballroom in that silk gown, chin held high, while the world applauded. At the bottom of the letter, the little girl wrote in careful, looping handwriting, "When I grow up, I want to walk like you, even if they laugh at me." Monique folded the letter gently and pressed it to her chest, and for the first time since that night, she cried. Not for pain, but for the magnitude of what had happened. Because something had shifted, not just in her, but in us. A culture that once worshipped glamour had been forced to look at grace. A world addicted to applause had been silenced by dignity. 1 month later, at the newly renamed Ellis-Rhodes Institute for Human Dignity, Monique stood before a small crowd of students, artists, mothers, educators, and community leaders. She wore a simple cream blouse, no makeup, no jewelry, just her. Dominic sat quietly in the front row, pride written across his face like scripture. "People often ask me," Monique began, "what I would say to the girl I used to be." She paused, eyes scanning the room, her voice gentle but anchored in steel. "I would say, don't change. Not for them. Not to fit into rooms that weren't built for you. Because one day, they'll need the very thing they told you to hide." The crowd leaned in. "And when that day comes, don't stand over them, stand beside them. Remind them of their better selves, even if they never reminded you of yours." Tears shimmered. "I don't want statues. I don't want headlines. I want something simpler. I want a world where girls like me don't need a scandal to be seen, where dignity doesn't have to defend itself." She smiled softly. "And if that's the world we want, then let's build it." Outside the institute, carved into a smooth stone by the garden entrance, were the words that had come to define her. "Power is not in being celebrated. Power is in showing up when no one claps and shining anyway." Monique Ellis-Rhodes. That wedding had once been designed as a spectacle, a monument to wealth, vanity, and exclusion, but instead, it became a movement. Not one started with a megaphone, but with a handmade gift. A stained dress, a soft-spoken woman with a backbone of iron, and a husband who, when the world tried to tear her down, walked into the storm and said, "She is mine, and she is enough." Monique Ellis-Rhodes will not be remembered for the wine they spilled on her. She'll be remembered for the light she carried in, for standing when the world wanted her to shrink, for loving when hate roared, for walking back into that ballroom, dignity intact, and reminding us all, sometimes the most powerful woman in the room is the one they tried to mock. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or judged by your appearance, know this: you are not invisible. You are not less. You are not alone. And just like Monique, you don't have to shout to be powerful. You just have to stand. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Subscribe to our channel for more true, powerful stories that uplift and inspire. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen dignity win like this before? We'd love to hear your story.